So hi everyone, I'm Rebecca. I'll start by saying thank you all for joining. Nice to see so many people here today. And this is the sort of first meeting of the recently relaunched PRCA Business Development Group. I'm personally really happy to be co-chairing this alongside Anushka and in partnership with Ingenuity, mainly because it's long been on my agenda to try and build a supportive community of PR business development people who are often at the sharper edge of agency life. We're going to be holding a session like this once a quarter with the aim of helping members like you guys understand the sort of true potential of new business and agency marketing, exploring themes that we know are relevant to you, giving you the skills and best practice to better contribute to your agency's growth. After this first session, and with that in mind, we're going to do a poll at the end of this where you can vote on specific topics that you'd like us to cover in forthcoming sessions, and then they'll be tailored to what you're looking for. In the session today, we're going to explore how business development has evolved over the last 18 months. I'm sure you've all got frontline experience of dealing with new business in the lockdown, and what agencies now really need to do to ensure your channel strategy is match fit for winning. In terms of my personal experience, I've had over 20 years in a business development role in PR, in the PR industry across a handful of agencies. I now head up European business development at Three Monkeys Zeno, so I've pretty much been there, seen it, done it across hundreds, if not thousands. I was trying to think this morning of pitches. I've also developed agency development plans, including setting up new practices to secure new revenue streams, creating new capabilities from scratch that I think the market is looking for. And I've done the sort of day-to-day hustle of networking, building relationships within the industry and making sure that awareness is within trade media. I know there's also a huge amount of experience amongst the other group leaders of this session today. I think there'll be much to learn, looking forward to getting stuck in. And we're going to do, because there's quite a lot on the session today, we're going to do questions at the end if that's okay. So don't bob your little notes in the chat box, if you just keep a note of them, and then yeah, Molly and Chris are going to run through their slides, their presentation, and then happy to take some questions at the end that you may have. So introducing Anushka.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm Anushka from Richmond and Towers, which is a brand engagement agency. I have been working agency side for about 13 years now, doing agency business development. I think a couple of years of that, I've also worked within new business agencies for a couple of years. And so, yeah, I've been doing it, I feel like I've been doing it forever, but in fact, not totally. And prior to that, I was doing, I came from a sort of very corporate sales, cutthroat environment. So I come from a slightly different place from Rebecca, in that I moved from sales into the agency world. But yeah, I'm really excited to be involved. I think we've all struggled so much over the last couple of years. It's been such a period of change. So I'm really looking forward to exploring that with you all, and sharing hints and tips and all sorts. And I'm also very excited to be co-chairing with Rebecca, who's obviously a very high caliber of BD professional. So I feel very honoured. So yeah, so now I will hand you over to Chris and Molly from Ingenuity.
Thanks, Anushka. Morning, everyone. I'm Chris Kemp. I'm the CEO and founder of Ingenuity. So big thank you to Anushka and Rebecca for inviting us along today for the first of the sessions that we'll be doing on a quarterly basis. We've been fortunate to work with the PRCA now for kind of over 4 years, helping them in a number of different ways, including pitches that they run. So we're really fortunate to have built that relationship. I suppose for today, really, it's important for us to help in any way we can. Feel free to ask questions at the end, but in terms of us, we've got quite a lot to run through, but I'll introduce you now to my colleague, Molly.
Morning, everyone. Lovely to meet you all. Yeah, my name's Molly. I head up new business here at Ingenuity and essentially kind of look after the agencies that we work with to kind of fuel their growth. So a lot of what we'll talk about today is kind of how we then activate channel strategies, and a lot of those elements that we kind of work across, we're supporting agencies with kind of on a day-to-day basis. In relation today, hopefully you can all see my screen now. Just shout if you can't. But essentially what we're going to be doing, as Rebecca quite rightly mentioned, is basically sort of kickstart these new BD group forums. Really exciting to be kind of kicking this off first off to basically just sort of create some thought starters in terms of, defining your differentiator as an agency, how that then translate into compelling content that sits across various different channels, and then also how you can kind of build a go-to-market strategy to help you win new business. So hopefully the content that we talked through today is helpful. And as Chris mentioned, we'll take questions at the end. So yeah, hopefully we can kind of run through. Chris is now going to chat a little bit more about us and our kind of credentials for having this conversation in the kind of PR industry.
Brilliant, thanks Molly. So yeah, I suppose a bit of background to Ingenuity, which might serve as useful context. I expect a few of you know who we are, looking at the list. Obviously we know you. So I set up Ingenuity in 2005, and we've really all been about as a business in terms of kind of bringing agencies and brands together. So I suppose the main thing in terms of what we do is we help agencies and brands come together. So our business is split into a number of different areas. We started life very much around working with agencies and Nushka talked about it there, really the more kind of core sales function of helping agencies go to market in terms of the lead gen function. I always say there are 10 stages to winning a new client, and the main job of Ingenuity initially was those first 5 stages. So really helping with that kind of outbound process of, generating leads and opportunities. And obviously to do that, you need good content. You need to really have a really kind of clear, integrated plan to drive that forward. So a big part of our business is really working with those agencies to create content, to understand what assets they have, and then to create a really interesting integrated channel plan. And I think we'll talk about it today, but that channel plan has become more important than ever in the last 2 years as throughout the pandemic really, but also because of the competitive nature of the communications and creative industries, that really agencies have to stand out more than ever, and their shop window and their own brand is more important than it's ever been. So we've almost become a kind of B2B agency for agencies, if you like, in terms of kind of helping them take their business to market in the best way and the way that works for them. We're also, as many of you will now know, we work with a lot of brands. So we run about 160 pitches a year with a whole kind of myriad of brands across all sorts of different disciplines. I think the world of brands has changed so much again in the last 3 or 4 years, with new entrants coming into the market that really disrupting the establishment. So for us, we're always about trying to find good partners and the right type of partners for those brands. And increasingly, they're obviously across different areas, be it PR, content, social, obviously, influencer and technology, and of course, more traditional means such as media and advertising as well. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an understanding as a business. We're about 70 people across the base. And like I said, we've been going for nearly 17 years now, and with the aim of really helping agencies grow and find the right brands to work with, and now increasingly being in a really privileged position to help brands, I suppose, navigate the kind of the changing agency landscape that is both a confusing but also an exciting place for brands to be at the moment. So yeah, we wanted to talk a little bit about kind of what's working in new business and kind of give that kind of macro view really, in terms of the kind of things in general really. So I suppose when I always talk to agencies, we talk an awful lot about, as an agency, you've got to have something that is ownable, and you really need to make sure that you are both kind of packaging things up that are easy to buy and that you're following the market. And I think that's a really, really important place for us really to kind of start with this, is that simplicity of what you are selling and that easiness to buy is probably more important than it's ever been. I think increasingly you also need to be thinking of your business, as I already said, as a brand in its own right. So your agency shop window and your channels is absolutely crucial. And particularly now in the kind of virtual world that we live in, that actually having the good content on your site to drive new conversation, but to also give people that work for your business the ability to share the content that you've created and to drive their own networks. I think that's going to become increasingly important. I know it's a big debate about, how agencies evolve, and particularly if people are in the office a bit less, but actually getting people that are in the organisation to share content and to really be business drivers themselves. I think, everyone on this call is obviously hugely involved in business development, but I think everyone would also feel that it's not just your jobs to do business development, it should be the job of a lot of people in the organisation. And I think that's a hell of a lot easier if you've got really good content and thought leadership that everyone can share and use accordingly. So that real kind of ownership of something and really kind of, you know, taking control of that is become increasingly important. And that whole piece all around the kind of that packaged up product that you can sell from cold is more important than it's ever been. And we're draw into that a little bit more as we go throughout the session. So I mean, just to start with the kind of some of the trends that we've seen, I suppose, in the last 2 years or so. I mean, I think I did a presentation the other day to the Publicist Group, and we were talking about bouncing back from COVID. And it was the kind of, you know, some of the big themes that emerged. We're talking about in terms of new money. So that was a big thing in terms of, you know, private equity and new brands that have been created. There was also a big debate around the kind of the independents versus the networks and how that's kind of shifted and changed over the last 18 months in both directions, really. There's obviously been some agencies that have struggled a bit, and I think they've been ones that really haven't really defined what they are. And of course, increasingly, there's this big thing around talent. And I think this point around talent will be something that I'm sure we'll talk about today. But I think you'll see more movement than ever across people in different industries or disciplines within creativity. So there's more movement from people going to PR agencies to ad agencies and vice versa, technology businesses, customer engagement businesses, UX, you know, design and build businesses, not to mention obviously kind of up and coming creative and social agencies. So I think there's a hell of a lot to kind of discuss today in terms of changes in the market. But I think one thing I would start with is we do work in a creative industry, and I think increasingly creativity has become a more important part in a lot of the PR briefs that we're seeing. And I think a lot of that to do with the type of brands that are emerging, and I suppose the earned first nature of those brands. So, you know, I think earned first creative is really, really as important as ever been. And I think it's brands are kind of looking for, you know, they don't have to go to their advertising or traditional above the line agencies for that. And we see that with a lot of the PR and communications businesses that we're working, that because they've always come from an earned first basis, that actually holding creativity as more part of what they're doing is really kind of helping those brands get and stay ahead, really. So we're seeing a lot more briefs coming through, and I think it's something that a lot of businesses, a lot of PR agencies need to think about is their creative product.
Yeah, and then in kind of relation to social as well, this is a big trend that's kind of coming out, the conversations that we're having with brands from a pitch point of view, and the kind of social and content events that we run, the briefs that we get via that are kind of really, really socially led. And social has definitely been kind of a game changer for the PR industry, absolutely no doubt. And you'd probably struggle to kind of find a PR agency that now don't claim to offer social as part of their kind of suite of strategic services. I think when we then go out and find kind of PR agencies to meet those needs, often when brands are looking for social specialists, those agencies don't necessarily they're not necessarily too vocal about their kind of social capabilities. It's not necessarily communicated on their websites and through their own social channels. And it always strikes me that kind of social agencies don't necessarily give their own social channels the care and attention that they would then do for a brand, when that is kind of a key sort of distinguishing factor as to whether they might be the right agency partner for them. So social is definitely something that we're seeing kind of an increase.
Hi, I think we just dropped out. I think we're back on now. Can someone give me a thumb up? Are we back on? Yeah, brilliant. Sorry about that.
What was the last thing anyone heard?
I think we were just finishing up on the point on sustainability and D&E.
You were mentioning about brand reputation, I think.
Brand reputation, perfect. Yeah. So then we just kind of went on to say that sustainability, DE and I continue to be kind of key themes and trends, and that is now translating into kind of the RFIs as well that we're sort of seeing. Brands want to see those kind of credentials up front before they kind of take brands forward increasingly.
Thanks, Molly. I think a lot of this stuff might seem quite obvious to people, but we thought it would be important to, I suppose, kind of draw attention to this, is that the kind of the 3 stages of a buying process for a brand. And, you know, we work with all sorts of different businesses, from networks to kind of startups. And what we really wanted to kind of do today was talk a little bit about, you know, both aware that the kind of those 3 stages, from awareness to being considered and then converting that through. And quite often when you talk to agencies, they tend to have maybe a problem with one of them, in the sense that they're on lots of pitches, but they can't win enough, or they're just not being considered, or no one knows who they are. That said, every agency I ever meet will always say to me that if they get in the room, they've got an amazing conversion piece, but quite for a lot of them, they're not just being considered enough for those pitches. So we're going to draw into a bit more detail into those kind of 3 different areas. Dropped it. Yeah. So we're there again. Sorry, did you drop out again?
Yeah, but you're back on now.
I'm back on now.
Yeah.
So, right. So we were talking about, obviously awareness, consideration, and that conversion piece. So the way we try and break this down is that really understand what those channels are within those 3 different areas. So, you can see what's in front of you there, but I think the awareness play has become more important than ever in terms of that, your own agency PR and being visible. I think we see this with a lot of, there are certain types of agencies that have done this very well. Their leaders tend to be out there the whole time, and quite often those agencies look and feel probably both bigger and more successful than what they actually are through the joy of doing good PR, which everyone will know about. So that is obviously something that, you'll look at and certain people do particularly well. I think obviously increasingly digital marketing in terms of actual, again, it's related from really good content and then using the right channels through LinkedIn in particular, but, targeting people in terms of the right contacts through your LinkedIn channels, and actually just, utilizing all those digital channels in an interesting way. But LinkedIn is such a wonderful tool that a lot of agencies just don't use the right way. They use it more as a broadcast piece rather than being a lot more targeted. So I think that awareness piece, we could go into that in a lot more detail, but you can kind of see this importance of being out there and kind of creating a buzz and utilizing that shop window. And I suppose that consideration stage is probably going back more to that, as I described, probably if it's 1 to 5, probably the 3, 4 and 5 really. So owning a new business strategy, and obviously a lot of agencies, this does take time and investment, but really kind of looking at your own events, looking at gold list processing, looking at really, good outbound campaigns, utilizing those LinkedIn from a kind of sales navigator and driving events through, attending events again now. I think obviously we'll see that a lot more as we come out of COVID in terms of people being able to go to events. I know it's a big area that a lot of agencies have struggled not just to have those face-to-face, but a lot have also pivoted into doing their own ones. And for us, we've also now increasingly started to do more kind of master classes where we can bring agencies in to talk around different subject areas. And I suppose this conversion piece, then, this is more about kind of ingenuity in terms of how we can help from that conversion piece across the intermediaries, the pitches that we run. We run lots of sessions called Challenge Connect, where brands come to us with a challenge and then we provide agencies to help them fulfill that challenge. And then, of course, we do a lot of work around kind of proposition consultancy. So these are the kind of, obviously, the channels within those that you can really start to build out across those 3 different areas. And depending on where your strengths or weaknesses are, obviously, you need to kind of look where you might invest across those different areas.
Yeah, and hopefully this kind of impresses that there are so many channels that you could utilise. It's just all about kind of finding the channel that suits your agency strengths and the kind of content that you do or don't have. And doing kind of any one of these things in isolation may not necessarily have the kind of impact that you're looking for, but actually a kind of integrated channel plan that draws on a number of these and is really kind of a sales and marketing plan that comes together will probably be the most effective way of working.
So kind of what we really wanted to do is to kind of, define and building your brand really, I think is a the definition of what that brand looks like, and having that brand and that shop window is increasingly important. We've seen this with, all sorts of different organisations that we work with. I think if you look across the PR industry, recently a lot of people, going into too many names, people like Mischief have had a good run recently in terms of winning stuff. People like Frank for a long time always had the piece around the kind of talkability. Look at someone like Edelman and their trust survey, and then moving into, I suppose, probably bigger ad agencies, people like McCann have always had that kind of their truth series. So it's really here more about the definition and then building content around that brand that people can feel that there's something that represents that organisation or that agency. So even VCCP, they still talk very much about the challenger. And even though they obviously work with some of the biggest brands in the UK and globally, they've always been about, from the days of O2, of kind of being about the challenger and taking that business forward. So I think, you know, having that definition is really, really important, and it helps with everything off your brand, your agency shop window in terms of kind of how you take that to market and kind of drive that forward.
And increasingly talent as well. I think Chris touched on it, but kind of the marketplace is so crowded, and actually having that distinguishing factor from a talent point of view and new people coming into the business for them to sort of say, well, that, you know, that aligns with my values, that aligns with something that I really kind of believe in. That's kind of increasingly important.
And I suppose it also then fits into, we spend a lot of agencies talking to agencies about not just definition of trying to own something, but what that means in terms of that packageability and ease to buy. And I think it's always important as an organisation to have a view on what's happening next and to start to create content around these kind of big, more societal issues, you know, be it around the green future, be it around areas of ageism, whatever it may be, or even then looking at, you know, emerging technologies. You know, the metaverse is obviously something that's really kind of hit us all in the last, you know, from an agency point of view, the conversation for the last 4 or 5 months. But I think brands now increasingly are coming to us already and saying, what does this mean for me? What does this look like? You know, what should we be doing about NFTs? What should we be doing around crypto? So I think as a business, it's all, you know, it's always really important to have views on this. And I think it's also a great way to engage your talent, your organisation. I mean, I know here we've got people that are graduates that know so much about crypto and NFT and understanding what the future holds. And I'm really trying to bring them in terms of what their views are on it, so we can share that with organisations that we work with. So I think there's it's such an interesting time from a new business point of view, because there's so much content that you can produce, and there's so many different views you can get to be part of that. So quite often when you are producing these reports or creating this content, not only does it act as great fodder for events that you put on, it's also a really good way of engaging your own clients to get them involved in that conversation, but also to go out to potential clients and get them to be involved in that conversation. We run lots of webinars and roundtables now that become more about face-to-face for clients. We did one last night for an organisation, for an agency, and they had, you know, 15 people on a round table, and it was, you know, half of the people there were their clients, but half weren't their clients. It's just a nice form of bringing people together around that conversation. And it's as we well know, I'm sure everyone does these kind of things, it's a great way of kind of building those relationships out. And I think that kind of links into that whole point really about creating that compelling content play, having something where it goes back to that ownability. And I think this needs to be something that represents you as an agency, but something that you feel very comfortable with creating. And I think it's, again, I keep saying it's going to be something that everyone kind of feels comfortable across the organisation. So, you know, this might be around diversity. And if that is the case, you need to make sure that you've got both credentials and a strong background to be able to deal with that. But to, you know, produce a piece of content, we did here at Crispin Porter, and this whole diversity in terms of it needing a rebrand. We've got lots of interesting speakers involved in this, lots of interesting brands, and we really made them part of the conversation. Or it might be something that's a lot more, I suppose, a much more bigger academic piece or a bigger piece of ongoing thought leadership. So this is taken from an agency called Brand Pie that are more in the kind of, I suppose, management consultancy stroke brand consultancy space. And really understanding the role of purpose for CEOs, which obviously is a huge part of what the modern CEO needs to be looking at. So that was something we did with them 2 or 3 years ago, but it's been able to mean that they can be very much part of the conversation of purpose moving forward. Or for someone like Rap, we've created a thing called the Fierce series, which they talk a lot about being fiercely individual as an organisation and the clients they work with. So you can create a nice piece of content and you can talk about, you can then make that episodic in terms of what you're doing and really involve lots of different people around that piece. So there's lots of different ways of doing this, and it can really kind of be an ongoing piece, such as the game of life, where it's all about different life stages that people go through, and then it can be tailored to different industries, be it, you know, utilities, be it financial services, be it automotive, or someone like BBH, they're producing something that's more creative in more of a kind of magazine, but at least it gives them something out there to kind of start and engage those conversations in. So I think the importance of that content play for agencies is more important than it's ever been. And then off the back of that, once you've got all that brilliant content in place, I suppose it comes down now to channel strategy. And I always think it's interesting when we've really evolved as a business from starting off as probably more of a lead gen company and then moving into events and now helping with content and PR and obviously now running lots and lots of pitches. And I think it always struck me that people like to kind of stay in a lane when it comes to new business. So they might want to double down on events or double down on prospecting or really invest in their PR. But I think for me, it's always been about trying to utilize a cross section of different channels and be true to yourself about what those channels should be. So not every agency is the same in terms of personality. You know, some agencies don't want to be out there shouting from the rooftops about how wonderful they are. They want to do it in a more subtle way or a different way. And I think all of that is fine, but I think it's exactly that you'd say to your clients is don't just talk about one channel. I understand what those different channels are and make sure that you're utilizing those in the right way and you're testing and refining them and you're changing them for different areas. If you're pushing, I don't know, if you've got a B2B practice, you might actually business development and more traditional prospecting works well because there's so many new brands in there. Whereas if it's more corporate, round table big events work in a different way, or really investing in content and thought leadership. So all of these things probably sound quite obvious to most people, but actually stepping back and looking at that channel strategy is something that we are increasingly talking to agencies about. And then it plays back to that whole piece of awareness, consideration, conversion, and to start to understand what those different areas can be and where you should invest in terms of what those channel strategies are. So hopefully that overall we've got a bit of time obviously, but hopefully that gives you a kind of overview to start with. And I think as a starter, obviously we want to make these sessions as we want to concentrate on the areas that are the most important to you guys across the piece, but hopefully that gives you a bit of an understanding of not only Ingenuity, but I guess more importantly where we're finding the trends are and what's happening in the industry. And I'm sure there's quite a lot of questions off the back of that, but if we all jump back to screen, we could probably go from there. So I'm sorry that the internet cut off a few times there. I think there might have been a few things that got lost. I do apologise, especially as we're in the office. There's no reason why that should have happened. But I don't know if anyone's got any questions off the back of that they want to fire our way.
Or Kyrie, if not, if we want to run the poll maybe to kind of get an understanding of the kind of laser focused topics and themes we want to discuss in the following sessions.
Yep, I'll start that now.
I'll poll a question to the group actually. It just might be interesting. Obviously, Molly and Chris there sort of scoped out 3 different sort of pillars to an agency business development strategy. How do people feel they do against that? Or is it any of those, which part of those 3 from awareness, consideration or conversion do you most struggle with? Does anyone want to proffer up any sort of first-hand experience?
I'm happy to go first. So I'm Jason from Karma.
Hi there.
We're the PRCA's partner for monitoring and analytics. I think one of the challenges that we've got as a brand is awareness, and you're a pretty good audience to test that out with, I guess, in terms of how many of you are actually aware of Karma as a brand. I think once we get to the consideration phase and we start having a dialogue, then in terms of what you guys were saying then, I think then we get in, that's much easier for us. It's getting our foot in the door that we find a challenge with, and coming up with creative ways of making sure we make that happen.
Yeah, and I actually see a lot of the marketing that Karma does do, but obviously I'm within the industry, so I'm sort of eyes and ears into it already. So I guess it is the challenge is actually how do you cut through to the people who are actually going to buy it at the end of the day. And I think it's something that Chris was saying, like the content piece has to be very carefully thought through, because the world does not need more content. What people need is more content that's going to help them solve a problem. And so it's finding something that does bridge, what's going on in the wider world that we're interested in learning more about or understanding or analysing, plus what does my agency stand for? And it's combining those two things that actually does make powerful content that makes an impact.
Yeah, I think everyone's drowning in content. It's the interpretation of that data that I think is the challenge nowadays, and it's getting that message. It's getting that message across. But yeah, I mean I think that's the area that's that's a challenge for us.
Yeah, and it's also not just saying that message once. It's saying that message across all the different channels, lots of different times. So episodic is really, really important because, I'm sure you'll probably know the data on how many times you need to read something before it actually goes in. But certainly in new business, you need 10 to 12 touch points before it actually turns into a client. And it's finding imaginative, thoughtful ways to say the same thing to the relevant audience.
Yeah, and I think it's the timing as well. It's that, people aren't, it's that keeping people constantly aware, because how long is the average agency engagement? 3 years, 4 years?
Yeah, exactly.
At any one point, you're only going to be looking at perhaps 25% of the potential, markets available, because the contracts aren't up for grabs. So it's keeping that consistent awareness phase,
Absolutely. And I think something that Molly touched on, I think over my experience working in new business for many, many years, I feel that quite often there's a perception that there's like sort of a magic wand. If we get this right, then the pipeline will open. It'll be amazing. And whether that's you decide to invest in a great big smashing sponsorship, or whether you've got a really nice panel event. And I think the sum of my experience is that it isn't about the one thing, and it is about what Molly was saying. It is about absolute consistency, Jason. It's about doing things, lots and lots of little things across all the channels. And that's what makes the difference between a good business development person and a not so good development person, because you've basically got to be relentless and consistent, and you have to do the do as well as talking about doing the do.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it makes it more successful.
I think you're dead right, Rebecca. I think the thing where it starts with though is actually the targeting, because there's always going to be, as an agency, I say this every day, you're always going to have brands that come to you, because virtually every agency's biggest source of new business is word of mouth and recommendation. So you're always going to have those ones that naturally will come to you anyway, past relationships, they move somewhere, whatever it may be. And so therefore you've got to work out where's my best chance of winning, particularly from cold, in terms of who am I going to prospect to? So what type of brands? Are they owned by private equity? Are they in certain target sectors? And that's what the ownability thing is, because every agency, if they try to own something across all of their clients, it's quite hard to pick a theme, because they have some anomalies in there, because they come through word of mouth and recommendation of people they've worked with for years, and their business has changed. And so therefore you just have to work out, okay, I must start with that targeting. What type of organizations do we do the best work with? And where have we got the best chance of winning and building that relationship over a period of time? Because you're not going to, particularly when you're looking at how you market your brand, it's then about moving from awareness to consideration, that they go, oh yeah, those guys are really smart. I've gone to a couple of their events. I really like what they had to say. They keep good company, or they do these really clever reports. And so that's where the ownership thing happens. And I think the biggest challenge for new business people is that these things obviously don't happen overnight. So everyone in new business is like, well, where are the leads? You've got a CEO or the network saying, well, where are we winning? Where are we going after? And I think that's the whole thing about making sure you've got these different channels running simultaneously, because you need to say, look, this is our longer term process, which is more about content, being in the right channels, building that through. And this is this stuff where I can win shorter term, which is intermediaries, running events, doing roundtables, using our clients. And I think that's the really, really important thing of how you move that forward, is start with that targeting and really work out those areas where you're most likely to win in the short term versus the longer term.
Yeah, exactly. I think the other point that you touched on, Chris, that's also absolutely pertinent, which is that the business development team within an agency is usually quite small. It might be 1 or 2 people. You might have some hours from some other people within the agency to help and assist and support. But essentially, it's a small group of people. And I think one of the sort of behaviors of somebody who's more successful is to filter the work that needs to be done and the thinking across the agency and really embed it across the agency. I think that's when it's not about one individual. Of course, one individual is ultimately accountable, but the responsibility for new business needs to be seeded right the way across the business, precisely for, exactly that point. NFTs, there are far more qualified people to talk about NFTs than me. I can give it literally two sentences. The changing world of sustainability, purpose, as you say, it's about drawing on the right expertise and making them responsible for writing up a case study in a more impactful way than I would, because I didn't firsthand do that campaign. And so I think one of the real success factors is, making everyone from, account execs right the way through understand the part that they can play, not only in building their network, but contributing towards, creating content, which is, it's like being a publisher. It's hard work getting really, really interesting content. And so spreading that responsibility is something that I would very much recommend.
Definitely. I think it's a really, I kind of touched on it there, and it's easier talking in this forum than when you're presenting, but I think it's also a big point in terms of the next generation of people in agencies, because I think, we've got to be honest with ourselves. The agency world is obviously, like every sector, it's been quite tough over the last couple of years, but we will lose talent if we don't engage people and we give them an opportunity for them to shine. And I think a lot of people worked in the creative world because they would meet interesting people, they'd be out there, there's lots of face-to-face, you do really interesting things, and you could be generally creative. I think as agencies, they can't let people just sit behind their computers at home now. They've got to bring them back into the office, and they've got to get them meeting people, and they've got to get them networking, they've got to get them talking about subject areas that are really close to their heart. And if you give them that opportunity, yes, some of that will be through digital, because that's the modern language in terms of the channel. But actually, then also you'll keep that talent because they feel like they've got some purpose in what they're doing. And that's a big thing we see more and more with agencies, is that it's like when you run pitches now, it's like generally put the team in that are going to work on it. Don't hide, don't just put your senior people on that call. And so I think that whole transparency is more important than ever. And I think I've seen a big shift in agencies about how new business is done and the type of teams that people have. And the new business team over there and everyone else over there, it has to get closer. And I think it's those points you make, Rebecca, are really, really true.
Hi, Chris. This is Jo. Sorry, I work with Waggers. I'm conscious we're dominating the conversation. I'm the MD of Three Monkeys Zeno. You touched on something I'd like to ask your opinion on that does affect everybody in this meeting, which is the pitch process itself. And while, biz dev is absolutely critical, the pitch process diverts so much energy and attention from the stuff we would all like to be doing. And there's a lot of debate about it at the moment with the PRCA and others, looking at the component parts of it. What's your view of the pitch process? Does it need to change? Is it broken?
Yeah, it's really interesting. There was a big thing last week, wasn't there, 2 weeks ago with ISBA and the IPA, which we haven't really publicised, but we were heavily involved with that. We worked very closely with ISBA and the IPA, and we were heavily involved with kind of, conversations that have gone on there. And obviously we work closely with the PRCA. I think for us, really, the pitch process is really interesting because it is fundamentally wrong and broken. But the problem is there's not the incentive, I think, to change it. And I think the problem is that all the intermediaries have been coming out for a long time and saying, oh, it needs to be a different model, it needs to be a different model. But a lot of those intermediaries are actually incentivized for it to be the same way in terms of being a member of their club, a long process because they get charged like management consultancies. So a 6-month process for them is absolutely, cash in, brilliant. I'm not saying that we're perfect, but what the model we have is that we only ask for a percentage from the winning agency. And so we are really basically incentivized to try and get the process done as efficiently as possible and for them to find the best partner. And so one thing that we did, Jo, last year with mainly in PR pitches. We did it with David Lloyd. There were a few other things that we did it with, where we started with a list of 6, where they did meet with 6 agencies, and then they picked, basically there were 2 or 3 that they particularly liked. So they ended up doing a workshop with those 2 or 3. Actually, it was 3 in one instance, and then another pitch we ran, it was 2. We did it 3 or 4 times, and we just made the pitch basically a workshop. So we kind of said that if the fee was typically around, anything really under 300 grand in fee, we would try and workshop it rather than make it a kind of long, arduous pitch process. And that doesn't actually, to me, sound like revolution, but actually, it actually is a big step forward, because the agencies that did it all loved the process. They felt that they've got proper time with the clients. They didn't have to prepare as much as they would do in a kind of pitch process where there's loads of information that comes from the client, but there's little kind of back and forth. There's little interaction between the kind of the briefing, and there might be a tissue session, but there's not really much that goes back and forth. So I think that the pitch process has to change. And I think things like the workshops is a way of doing it. But I also think that, the general challenge is that agencies will always say yes, or there's always an agency that will say yes. And so what we're trying to do is really put that emphasis back to the brand to say, you can't behave like this. You've got to do things in a different way. But I think the other intermediaries need to kind of look at their models to be able to, to do that, because they do charge the brands to run a big, long process. So that is something I think that is a contentious issue. But that's how we're trying to deal with it, Joe. And hopefully that helps answer the question.
Yeah, it does. And I appreciate the candor around the money bit as well. We're all driven by that too, but not at the expense of people and talent and burnout, which is obviously the big debate, given the talent drain. Yeah, so thanks for that.
Yeah, I think the big thing that came out of those conversations with ISBA and the IPA was brought to light by mental health, and the fact that how people are working weekends, nights, and the thing that everyone on this call will know, and I say this to clients the whole time, is you've made them do this RFI and you don't even read it. So for ages, when we run pitch processes, we hardly ever ask an agency to do a long RFI, because it's just a waste of time. They won't, you guys will spend all weekend putting it together, making it look wonderful, and they don't really read a lot of it. So we're doing a pitch at the moment for, it will be one of the biggest reviews this year, and we've asked the agencies involved just to do a 90-second video. And of course that will take time to do it, but it's worth the size of the, but you've seen some of the ones that started to come back and they're really fun, they're interactive, they're great. And of course that has taken time, but it gets the personality across as well. And I think that's, so many pitches are bought on, people by people and the chemistry points. So I think there's also a kind of increasingly a responsibility to try and change the way that people source the agency. And a big thing I want to do this year is almost a 48-hour pitch or 24-hour pitch, where I bring people together and say, right, the briefing's on the Tuesday and you've got to all pitch back on the Wednesday lunchtime. You've got, 24, 30 hours to solve this. And that's almost like the real world, isn't it, when a brand chucks you a brief. So I think there are different ways of doing it, definitely.
Yeah, I think some of the things that we've experienced, we have done workshop pitches, and I really like those. So long as you have to have like really good, smart people that can interpret and analyze a brief really quickly. But they've tended to work for us. I think the show reel aside, I totally agree that absolutely gets across cultural fit. I think one of the types of pitches that I struggle with is it's already a long pitch process. So you've got like sort of, RFI that takes forever. Then you've got a creds, then you've got a chemistry. And then ultimately they want sort of 10 slides. This comes up quite often. They say, oh, no, don't waste a lot of time, just literally 10 slides. But to get to 10 succinct slides, you've already had 70, and so it's no more user-friendly than doing the 70. So yeah, I think I would absolutely agree with you that.
I think also there's more and more, there's just generally more projects as well, aren't there? Yeah. So I think, increasingly, if a brand will come to us with a certain challenge, we say, well, look, why don't you work on a project basis first? Let's just meet 3 or 4 agencies and let's get to the answer quickly. Yeah. And then you can kind of grow it out from there. So I think, you also see more and more brands working with multiple of agencies that are quite similar. They have a bit more of a roster. We had one the other day, we're working with a supermarket chain for their their clothing range. They've got a couple of different agencies they chuck different briefs to. And, you know, they love that because they had a sustainability brief and they chucked it to a different creative agency than their back to school campaign, for example. So I think you'll see a bit more of that as well. So you're kind of almost pitching within projects, so to speak, which you might think can create more work, but actually it's a great way of getting in there without a pitch sometimes as well. So
yeah. Is there any other questions, guys? Because I think yeah, Kiri has got a poll that I don't know how the tech works, but a poll that you can vote on perhaps, which is around what in particular would you like to see future sessions covers?
There's a question on the chat, Waggers.
All right. Well, I can't answer that because obviously I'll say myself, I'll say Three Monkeys Zeno, so somebody more partisan should probably answer that.
I would obviously say the same, but the thing is, I think I struggle to. I don't know if anyone's got it completely right. I sort of scour all the sort of different agencies' LinkedIn pages, and I think we all have the same sort of challenges where it comes down to actually getting the right content, having the capacity to create it and then to share it. And I think we're constantly working on that. So yeah, I just struggle to pick an agency who's doing it best.
I'd agree with you, Anushka, in terms of having that consistency across channels. There are a couple of moments where you think, oh, that was really, really clever. Rise at 7, the kind of management team there do a really good job of kind of building their own personal brand and putting out content that isn't necessarily long form white papers, but it's actually more video content. They've taken a kind of similar approach to the likes of Goat and running those kind of daily vlogs and that sort of stuff. So that works really, really well in sort of digital PR. I don't know if you've got any kind of thoughts on the awareness piece.
Yeah, I mean, I think what might not be a bad thing to do on this is to kind of, obviously you have to be sensitive of who's in the room and things, but maybe look at this as part of the session going forward about, you know, certain agencies that are doing particularly well from awareness and how they're doing their LinkedIn, and we can start to talk about and give some examples. I mean, I think where there's two kind of questions there, isn't it? There's a kind of there's the awareness point in general where certain agencies, particularly in kind of consumer PR, you know, someone like a Mischief, they've won quite a lot of work recently, they're kind of out there. Academy is a good example. Mitch has always had a profile that people know, and so, you know, that helps drive that through. I think for a long time, people like Pretty Green were out there driving that through, but probably maybe a bit less than it used to be. I think where we find quite often when brands come to us, they tend to talk about certain agencies that they just make quite a lot of noise with the people that are running them. So more of an awareness bit on LinkedIn, it might be they go, oh, you know, the Academy sounds very interesting, or they chuck names over where there's certain other agencies that who are really talented and we've got a brilliant management team that they've never even heard of, that might even be a lot bigger and have even better clients in that particular space. So I think without kind of naming that, I mean, a lot of agencies obviously do have the awareness piece, but I think some of them that do it well is where that leader can take, you know, the leader of the agency can really drive the profile and be out there and be kind of the spokesperson for that business. I mean, we worked with Stephen Bartlett for a long time when he was at Social Chain, you know, years and years ago, and obviously that email makes a living out of his own profile. But so you see that a lot with a lot of CEOs out there that have kind of taken their own business and they've been the driver off the back of that. So yeah, I think it's probably an area where we could go into a bit more detail, and I could give you some examples and show some kind of case studies what people are doing it, because that might help.
Yeah. Okay, there's another one on the chat. How do you inspire agency to drive business development across the business? This is challenge as for some. Well, for me, it's carrot and stick. Basically, start with a carrot, and then and then pivot. It's not easy because obviously we're in the interest of servicing clients, you know. So it's not because people aren't, you know, inclined to do it or don't see it as their responsibility. It's just a case of other people having different priorities. On a practical level, I think it's absolutely crucial that you that you get however you're structured, whether you get your practices or however your business is set up, they need to be responsible for pulling together their database, their clients that they think, the sectors that they think they're going to hunt in, and then the clients that are within that, and they need to be responsible for joining the forums on LinkedIn. You know, like the food and drink forum on LinkedIn is one of the busiest, most active, but if they're not commenting on it, then they're not, the awareness piece that you were talking about is not even there, because there's a whole host of brilliant brands on that sector group, but nobody from your agency is interacting with it. So again, I would say it's about AM1 making them responsible for pulling together that list and keeping that list refreshed. And that's not a difficult job, but it's an important job, and it sometimes gets overlooked. Just making sure that everything, the data has stayed fresh, and that you're working with them to oversee and have a framework for who and what are you connecting with them on. So I think that is just about the sort of making sure that the day-to-day goes, you know, happens all the time.
I think it's just about,
right, go on,
I was going to say it's about instilling that sort of growth culture. We've had challenges in the past, things have improved now, but I think it's just about changing the mindset, where it's not just about focused on clients and making people aware that it is up to everyone else within the agency. But also training. I find it fascinating, from having been from a sales background, how scared people who do PR are to sort of, you know, have that sort of sales conversation, when essentially that's what they're doing the whole time anyway with the journalists. So I think it's just about making sure people are aware of how to do it, how, you know, what kind of conversations they can be having, what they need to be saying, and so they kind of break down that barrier of fear.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a cultural thing. If you're starting from a business that wins lots of new business, it's easy because it's just what everyone does, and it's really easy. If you have a business that doesn't win many clients but keeps its clients really well, and has a culture where they get their head down a bit more and it's more about just retaining, it's really hard because people don't know what new business looks like. So I think you have to start by understanding what's the culture in this business, and if it is a very much a new business cultural type agency, you know, some of the ones I mentioned earlier will just naturally be like that's fine then, actually, because that probably didn't happen. But if it's a culture where you don't pitch loads of times, you don't have that, then I think really you then have to inspire. You've got to bring other people in from other agencies to talk about it, from partner agencies that you might work with in different areas or different disciplines, get them in talking about how they grew their business, bring entrepreneurs in. That kind of stuff really inspires people.
I think also have incentivize. Oh my god, I can't say the word. Do you know what I mean? Incentivize. There we go. Yeah. Staff. I mean, that's something people, you know, money talks, doesn't it? So that's something that we often do, just to get people moving in the right direction.
It's amazing in how many agencies there'll be someone in the account exec whose cousin or someone or a great friend is the CMO somewhere, and they just don't even say that. They probably don't feel, how do they say that, or how do they go about it, or what's the process? And so, you know, I think then when someone does do that, celebrate that and make such a big thing of that, and then other people will follow.
Yeah, exactly. There's a question, I think we've probably got time for this last question, and then we've got the poll. There's a question about the pitch workshops. From my experience, when I've been involved in pitching via a workshop, essentially you get given a brief, but only a short amount of time in advance. So it might be you get the pitch brief in the morning, and then you get it's a day session, and then you have I think you have like a couple of hours away, and then you can ask questions on the brief, so you can pressure test some of the initial sort of insights that you're coming up with. And then you go away literally with your team into a huddle, and you come up with what you think the recommendations would be to fix the challenges that you've got. So you can either, two ways that I've done it before, either you do that in silo, so they're in the building but not with you, and you do all your thinking and your brainstorming separately, and then you present back to the client. But we've also done it where we have some time to digest the brief, come up with our sort of initial angles that we're going to take our response, and then we workshop that alongside alongside the client. So the brainstorm is very collaborative, and then we might go away and summarize that in a few slides or a show reel or whatever. So it's across the day, and I think you've got to make sure you've got all the right people. It's about the planning in advance. So who will you have that can answer like the insights piece? How, what role will the creative director take? Also like the activation of a campaign is really important. So making sure like the people that are going to be on the ground doing the rolling out the campaign, getting those involved in it. But it works when you can really then build a chemistry with the client. So it's about that whole thing, which is like winning the pitch before the pitch. They sort of think you're our people, and then it's more about the chemistry and less about the actual what you present at 4 o'clock on the afternoon, because by which time they've thought, you know what, we think that we can work with you. We like the way that you attacked the brief. And we think you've got the right nous and understanding of our business. And so therefore you can then forgive any of the small nuances on the ideas if they weren't quite right, because they just think like we can work together on this now, and it's about finding a good agency partner. And I think that's much better than an agency spending 4 weeks having 3 presentations with different people joining the call, and then you basically put your heart and soul into it. You actually believe in what you're presenting, and then you have to wait 10 days for a response, which is there's no relationship been built there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Rebecca. I think the thing I would add to that in terms of how that better or different than the traditional processes, the reason we did it is because exactly that. You might have 3 agencies pitch, and one is just completely wide of the mark when it comes to the creative or the idea. So you're suddenly one's just been ruled out. And actually, that could be one thing where they're a brilliant agency, but the idea, they haven't sold it in the right way, or they haven't put it across, but actually they might be the perfect partner. So I think it does that. It gets away from someone just missing the mark. But it also actually, what's quite nice about it is it feels like it's collaborative in terms of who comes up with the idea. So it feels like the client is involved with that idea and that process. For a long time, CHI, who are now the AM partnership, they used to have this, this big wall of ideas where they would work with the client to kind of come up with the idea, and the client and obviously feels they own it. So then when you produce a wonderful piece of creative at the end of it, they feel it's their idea. So I think that's a big part of the process as well. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we're just out of time. I don't know if Kiri's getting my messages, but I think he was the one that could pull up the poll. Are you reading me?
I think the poll did pop up. That came up for us just before we kind of kicked off with some questions. So I think that might have already taken it.
Oh, right. It's done what it needs to do.
Hi, guys. Sorry about that. Yeah, so basically I put it up and I took it down because I saw that most people have responded. So
have they?
Amazing.
Great.
Yeah. So I've got the results and I'll show you guys later.
Brilliant. So we will take a look at that, take a look at your feedback on what you want to hear more of. Anushka and I will work with Molly and Chris to make sure that the sessions are reframed around those, and then we can end, as we have done today, with questions and a chinwag on the things that are bubbling up for you. I'm all done, so thank you all for joining.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Great.
Cheers, guys.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
See you all.
Thanks for your time, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.